You're listening to Strange by Nature, your guide to the strange, weird, unbelievable, and improbable wonders of the natural world.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for being here today. I'm Kirk Mona, and joining me are Rachel Gimza and Victoria Thompson. We're all naturalists who together have scoured the world for weird and wonderful wonders, just to please your mammalian brain's desire for novelty. Isn't that nice? Let's do this.
Well, hello everybody. Welcome to the show. Good to see you guys.
You too.
Hey!
Love being here.
Yes,
as always, good to
it
be
is.
here.
I'm going to start off this episode by talking about real estate.
What?
Because that makes a lot of sense for a nature show.
Real estate, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, so there's this
Interesting,
idea in sociology, I guess you could say, the vacancy chain. So stick with me. To simplify, the idea is that if you build like new housing, say a large single family home, that starts a kind of a chain reaction where the family that moves into that new large house then moves out of the place they were living.
Oh, sure.
And, makes that available for the person who wants to move up to a slightly larger, and, everybody moves up a notch, right?
Yeah, and you get that in like jobs and stuff too sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yes, it's used in employment as well. So the exact details of if and how well this process really works in the human housing supply market is not within the scope of this show.
Not what the show's about, yeah.
It does lead me directly to my topic for today, which I was inspired for by a clip I recently saw from a PBS Nature video of a large hermit crab.
Yeah, I thought that's where you were going.
Wait, I watched this happen on the beach. I did in the tide pools. That was really cool. Woo.
Well, yeah, so this large hermit crab who's outgrowing its shell finds an excellent new shell that it would like to use as a home. And this cues a bunch of other hermit crabs who also need new shells to line up, literally in size order. They create a literal vacancy chain. Once everybody's lined up correctly, the biggest crab will get into its new home, and then each crab down the line quickly moves one up down the line, taking into their new house.
That is fantastic.
Yes, so I'm talking about hermit crabs today. Rachel, you talked about them a little bit in episode 121 with that species that decorates its shell with a sea anemone, which is pretty cool. There's a lot more cool stuff about hermit crabs, though.
Absolutely. I don't know much. I just watched it.
Yes, in case you're not familiar with hermit crabs, they're a kind of crab that instead of growing their own shell, the front half of their body is covered with a hard exoskeleton.
Sure,
the back half of their body is soft and unexposed, and they use abandoned snail shells, usually, to live in and protect themselves. And they can hide in there, retreat. I did also talk about another species of hermit crab, the coconut crab, back in episode 187.
Horrifying.
That episode is worth a listen.
That was very fun, but also they're too big.
Yes, they are one species of hermit crab that does not use somebody else's shell. They grow their own.
I would be horrified if they were finding shells that big, because that means that there was something that grew to be that big that left behind a shell.
They're just using like trash cans or something,
Yeah. Yes, probably they would have to. One thing that I found super cool about hermit crabs is that because of the spiral shape of the snail shells that they use, those soft abdomens of theirs also have a kind of a spiral shape to them, making them an unusual example of an asymmetrical animal.
Huh.
Yeah,
it doesn't happen.
Interestingly, they start off...
You talked about this.
No, it doesn't.
Well, you talked about body symmetry, right?
Yeah, I did. Interestingly, they start off life as a symmetrical, free-swimming larva, but then they morph into the adult form that's asymmetrical and needs that empty shell to survive. And their claws are kind of asymmetrical too as adults, because they can use the larger claw to block the entrance of the shell if they need to retreat in there for
Okay.
protection.
Is that true for both males and females?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay.
You
I
may
know
be
in some
thinking
crabs-
about fiddler crabs.
Yeah, like the males with one
Yeah.
larger, and yeah.
No, this is more about their lifestyle and less about
Okay.
mating or anything.
Interesting. Yeah.
Speaking of claws, if you think enough about the hermit crab anatomy and lifestyle, a question eventually will occur to you, which is, how do they poop?
Huh.
Oh.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Because normally it's the
Well,
back
I
bet
end,
you're gonna tell
but
us.
that's covered by a shell.
Right?
Do they have like a little section that's their toilet in their shell?
They do poop inside the shell, and then they have a special claw that's specially adapted to scoop out
What?
the poop. It's a pooper scooper claw,
A pooper scooper claw.
and
That is.
put it on the ground.
Oh,
That's the title
wow.
of the episode.
Yep.
Lovely.
Super Scooper Claw.
Wow.
Well,
Those who clicked on the episode know if that made it into the title or not. We'll see.
Oh my gosh. Wild.
well, going back to that real estate metaphor that I started the episode with, it's
Yeah.
in fact even more apt than it seemed at first. So finding a suitable home is actually life and death business for the crabs. If their shell is not big enough, their growth can be restricted, and they wouldn't be able to retreat far enough inside to be safe from predators. Now, there's ocean-dwelling hermit crabs, and for them, finding a shell is not such a difficult task. There are many snails that get eaten or die, and they leave their shells behind, and the hermit crab will find one and move in as is.
Sure.
No, nothing else needed. For terrestrial hermit crabs, which are the kind that most people are familiar with, you see that those are the ones you see on the beach. Those are the ones that people have as pets.
Right.
Things are a
Okay.
little different. So the first thing to understand is these crabs cannot use just any old shell. Since they don't have the buoyancy of the water to support the weight, they have to carry the entire weight of the whole shell before each time they move. For terrestrial hermit crabs, things are a little different. The first thing you need to understand is that these crabs cannot use just any old shell. Since they don't have the buoyancy of the water to support the weight, they have to bear the entire weight of the shell each time they want to move anywhere.
Yeah.
I didn't think about that.
So, and snail shells have like a lot of architecture inside them to strengthen them, and
Keep
the
their
snail
shape,
has its own reasons. Yes.
Yeah.
But because of this, almost all terrestrial hermit crabs use shells that have literally been remodeled.
Oh, well, yeah, they would have to be, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Huh.
Yeah.
They can secrete chemicals, I assume some kind of acid, that weakens the inside of the shell, and then they can use their legs to scrape away and thin out the inside parts.
Cool.
Oh, wow. So they'd really rather have a used home that's already been done to.
Absolutely, yes. So they get rid of a lot of the internal spiral divisions of the shell this way, and they make it roomier. So there's more space. Sometimes they store a little water in there to keep themselves from dehydrating. They have their poop spot, I guess. You know,
Mixing with their water.
Yep.
Lovely.
Yeah. Maybe it's in a different part. Who am I to say? But yeah, it significantly reduces the weight of the shell as well. And it's actually quite difficult and time consuming.
Sounds like it would be.
As well as dangerous. Yeah, and it's dangerous because any time that a hermit crab is not inside the shell is a time when it is very vulnerable to predators.
Yeah.
So the real estate market is almost entirely for already remodeled shells, which can be used for many generations, in fact.
Right.
And actually, well, I'll get to that later. So hermit crabs are constantly trying to find a good empty shell or else to evict another crab so that they can take over their shell.
Right.
That's
kind of what I was
Yeah.
watching happen in the tide pool.
Well, exactly. So that vacancy chain, not so peaceful as I made it sound at first. There's not usually high quality remodeled shells just lying around on the beach. Somebody's in them. And so this vacancy chain usually happens when two crabs start to fight, with one trying to evict the other. And then all the crabs hanging around nearby on the beach then quickly get into that line to be
Because they see
ready
the
as
fight and they're like,
soon
oh,
as
there's
the
going to
fight
be,
finishes.
There's
Yeah,
gonna
exactly.
be.
Yeah, I was wondering how they knew that like an exchange was going to happen, but that makes a lot more sense.
Okay.
Yes. Also, side note, hermit crabs apparently have a very keen sense of smell for dead hermit crabs, so that they can find somebody who just
Wild.
died and take
Makes
over their
sense,
shell.
but wild.
Lovely.
But the loser crab of this fight is left in a very precarious position because the shell at the end of the line is too small.
Yeah.
Tiny.
Yeah. And, so sometimes they resort to using other materials like hollowed out stones or pieces of wood, or even human detritus like cans or hollow bottle stoppers.
Mm-hmm.
You can find some pictures on the internet.
It's kind of funny. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
We'll include a couple on our newsletter.
Yeah. Sadly, in some places, because of some combination of humans collecting shells from beaches and endangerment of snail populations, for various reasons, usually overfishing or habitat destruction, shells can be super scarce.
Yeah.
And more hermit crabs are having to make do with substandard housing like cans. So there's a housing crisis even for hermit crabs.
Tragic.
Yeah.
Wow.
One final thing, hermit crabs can live quite a long time in the wild. More than 30 years in some cases.
Ooh.
Yeah.
There are hermit crabs
Depending on
out
the
there
species.
older than me. Huh.
Yes.
Yes,
there
wild
are.
thought.
Wild. Okay.
However, in captivity, they often don't receive proper care, and they're deprived of social interaction if there's only one of them. And they are social creatures, meaning that, pet crabs often don't live nearly that long. So, to sum up, hermit crabs are real estate obsessed social animals, just like us.
Oh, good. I bet they would love HGTV. Would it be the shell version?
Probably so.
What would be the shell version?
It'd be HCTV, Hermit Crab TV.
Ooh, that's great. Ooh, I like it.
My sources this week were a very useful article from Natural History Magazine from June of 2014 called The Social Lives of Hermits by Mark E. Ladry.
I like it.
Ladra? I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Sorry, Mark. And beautiful biology website, which has some lovely photography from the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. Also got some information from Wikipedia.
Great.
We are going to take a short break. And when we come back, it'll be Kirk.
Fantastic. Hey everybody, welcome back. Food waste is a huge concern.
Yeah.
We can easily grow enough food to feed everyone on Earth. It's super easy.
Right.
But getting it to the people that need it and also not having it spoil along the way, that is a huge challenge. Globally, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency estimates that 1/3 of all the food produced in the world is wasted. That is 1 billion tons of food at an economic cost of $940 billion each and every year, which is
that's a lot.
Mind-boggling. Yeah. And one of the big problems with food is, this is not for lack of trying. People aren't just, throwing food away willy-nilly. But one of the big problems is that food naturally gets contaminated with bacteria. And it doesn't matter how much you wash food or keep food packaging systems clean. Bacteria is literally in the air, and food will always spoil, and bacteria is largely to blame. Now, there are other things like molds and whatnot as well. So the question comes up, what if you could kill the bacteria? And this is something we've been doing for a long time. We've mentioned on the show before that Louis Pasteur figured out what we now call pasteurization back in the 1860s. But people had been heating up food to preserve it for centuries before that. And heating food changes it though. and people have often sought other ways to preserve food and keep it safe while maintaining its original character.
Sure.
Well, back in the 1950s, scientists thought they had a possible new solution, and that is radiation.
Oh, yeah.
Goody.
So scientists were figuring out that life and radiation, especially high doses of radiation, they don't mix well. And when we can food, it's usually pasteurized by raising the temperature to I'm just going to say a hot temperature that is somewhere less than boiling.
Right.
And this kills off a lot of things like mold, bacteria, even pests like insects, which you would hope aren't in there, but could be.
Sometimes.
And as I mentioned, though, this process, it does change the food.
Right.
They've gotten really good at it where it doesn't have a super large change, but the pasteurization process does somewhat change the food. And so if there was another way that didn't change the food, that could be a pretty big deal. And the thought was, hey, what if we expose food to radiation?
Yeah.
And even when I brought this up, I know, Rachel, you sound a little like
I'm
I
a
could
little
feel the skepticism.
hesitant. Yes.
Yeah,
I don't love the
people often
idea
have
of radiation.
Right. And as well, you shouldn't. I mean, people often have a negative view of radiation. We've been so trained for years and years that radiation is bad. And that so many of us automatically recoil at the idea of any form of radiation getting anywhere near something like our food, right?
Well, I mean,
But here's the thing.
microwaves, I guess, right?
I mean,
Yes.
that's a different. Yeah, I mean, it's all part of the electromagnetic spectrum, right? Microwaves don't give off ionizing radiation.
Okay.
So it's a little bit different situation. When you have ionizing radiation, it's basically energy, basically kind of like light is energy as well. It's just at such a high energy level that it can literally strip things like electrons off of atoms. And that's what's called ionizing radiation. That's
Okay.
when things get really dangerous. And so ionizing radiation is dangerous. But here's the thing. Our food is exposed to radiation all the time. Everything on Earth is exposed to radiation. Our entire planet is constantly being irradiated because our planet is constantly being irradiated.
Right.
According to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the average human, so talking about humans, not food, don't eat your friends. The average human is exposed to about 620 millirems of radiation per year, just from natural sources such as soil, air, cosmic rays from outer space, and even,
Bananas.
bananas. Thank you. Yes, bananas are, if you did not know that, bananas are very, very weakly radioactive because of the potassium in them. So, to be clear, that doesn't mean that you are radioactive if you eat bananas or if you live on Earth and are exposed to radiation. Being exposed to radiation does not necessarily make something radioactive.
Right.
And that's a really important distinction. Life on Earth has evolved surrounded by radiation, and our bodies actually deal with small amounts just fine. It's part of living on Earth. So the key thing here, though, is that, like I said, is that being exposed to radiation does not make something radioactive itself. For example, X-rays are a form of radiation. If being exposed to X-rays made you radioactive, then a trip to the dentist would be a far different experience.
Yeah.
When you're walking out, right?
Glowing teeth.
So-
Let's go.
Yeah. So scientists back in the 1950s had an interesting idea. If we can expose food to gamma rays, which are another one of these forms of high energy radiation, it should kill any living thing in the food, such as bacteria, while also keeping the food itself completely safe to eat and completely unchanged. And if worked, this would be a game changer as far as food safety goes. Now, if at this point you're thinking, no way, I would never eat irradiated food, well, then I have some bad news for you.
Oh, God.
You absolutely have eaten irradiated food. Now, speaking just for the United States, here in the U.S., beef and pork, crustaceans like lobster, shrimp, and crab, fresh fruits and vegetables, lettuce and spinach, poultry, seeds for sprouting like alfalfa sprouts, eggs in their shells, shellfish or mollusks such as oysters, clams, mussels, and scallops, even spices and seasonings. These things are all allowed to be irradiated and sold to consumers. And these are supposed to have the Radura logo on them if they've been irradiated. But I'm guessing none of our listeners know what that symbol even looks like, and I never bothered to look for it on their food labels. And also, interestingly, if irradiated food is an ingredient rather than the final product, it doesn't even need to be labeled. So, there's other labels too. Like I think you can maybe even call it like electronic pasteurization. So you might see that and go, oh, that's, I don't know. Or I think for a while there was sure beam pasteurization, and you're like,
what is
okay,
that?
but like you wouldn't realize what it is. So the takeaway here is that probably all of our listeners have eaten irradiated food. And to be clear, you are safer and healthier because of it. It's actually a really great technology as far as food safety goes.
Huh, cool.
But what I want to talk about today isn't necessarily food irradiation. That's just sort of an interesting side tangent.
Oh.
I want to talk about a discovery that probably never would have occurred without it.
Oh.
So back in 1956, Arthur Anderson was working at the Oregon Agricultural Experiment Station in Corvallis, Oregon, and he was experimenting using gamma radiation to treat meat that was being canned or put into tins.
Mm-hmm.
And the amount of radiation he was using was exposed in this meat to was 2 to 3 megarads of radiation. Now,
sounds like a lot.
That's
a lot. I don't know.
That's not a.
I heard mega.
A unit of measure. Yeah. You caught the main part there. I did the math on this earlier. I mentioned that the average human gets about 300 millirems of radiation exposure per year. So to give you some perspective on how much 3 megarads is, according to my math, it would take 1 million years of natural exposure to get to that level.
Okay, then.
Oh, dear.
Yeah. But even if humans could live that long, keep in mind, we'd still be fine, though, because that's a low dose over millions of years. Yeah, and your daily exposure would remain the same as what it is right now, and humans are totally fine with that. But in this experiment with irradiating food, the canned meat received essentially 1 million years of radiation in just seconds. And when it's all at once like that, nothing can survive that,
No.
which is the idea. You just want to overwhelm any living cells so they will die. And again, for comparison, if we look at human exposure to radiation, usually we measure doses in something called sieverts.
Mm-hmm.
But one sievert can cause radiation sickness. A dose of 5 sieverts would kill about half of the exposed population within a month, assuming no medical intervention. Almost everybody who receives a dose of 10 sieverts will die within 3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
3 megarads is equal to 3,000 sieverts.
Instant death.
Okay,
so if 10 is fatal, this was 300 times the fatal dose for humans that they were exposing this canned meat to make sure that everything was dead.
What year was this?
And the way 1956.
That tracks.
Now, the way Anderson and his team ran the experiments, meat was canned and then exposed to these amazingly high levels of radiation, and most of the tins were fine. It worked out fine. The process worked, but a few eventually began to bulge from internal pressure. In other words, something was causing the meat inside to rot.
Yeah.
And give off gas that then
alive.
caused the cans to bulge. And this should be impossible because there was no known pathogen that can withstand 3 megarads of radiation. Well,
does it live on the sun?
Emphasis on was. Because of this research, we now know a bacteria known as Deinococcus radiodurans, who, if you speak Latin, the name basically means the terrible berry that can survive radiation, which is
Beautiful.
a good name. It's a good name. I actually, though, prefer its nickname that it has gotten sort of in the scientific community. It has been given the nickname Conan the Bacterium. Which I think is fantastic. I love scientists so much. I know we have a number of scientists who listen. They've written into us, and you're the highest caliber of people. I love you so much.
The best.
This bacteria actually holds the Guinness Book of World Records record for the life form that can withstand the highest doses of radiation and still live. It is remarkable. That in and of itself is a pretty cool story. But scientists didn't just stop there and go, neato.
No,
they got to work.
Yeah, now there's a fun new shiny toy that they got to play with. Yes.
There sure is. And scientists have been able to put this microbe to good use. Now, bacteria, different bacteria, are often used to help clean up contaminated waste sites. Because one of the things that some bacteria can do is they can clean up things like toxic heavy metals, including mercury in soil or water or all kinds of places.
Right.
But some of those toxic waste sites also contain radioactive isotopes. So places like former weapons manufacturing sites or accident sites like Chernobyl or the Fukushima Daiichi site in Japan. So cleaning up using bacteria in those sites won't work because the bacteria just die off. However, researchers have been able to create versions of Conan the Bacterium through gene splicing that can then also do these same cleanup tasks and survive the radiation. So that's just an amazing breakthrough as far as cleaning up toxic waste sites. And I assume all of our listeners are pro cleaning up toxic waste sites.
I would hope so.
So having this new version of this bacterium that can do that is a really big deal. Like that could be a game changer in that industry or that field.
Yeah, I have a question related to that before you go on. What?
Sure.
Okay, this might be off the rails question. What happens to the nuclear waste that the bacterium eats?
Well, that's a good question. In this case, they're not really, say, eating the nuclear waste.
Right.
We did talk in the episode that there was some other bacteria that I think I talked about many years ago.
Yeah.
That actually sort of thrived off the energy from radioactive decay. This is not, say, going in and trying to gather up those radioactive isotopes. Say if you had mercury contamination in water that was also contaminated with cesium or something like that. In this case, the bacteria is able to go in and clean up the mercury and capture the mercury without dying because of the cesium or the uranium or the radioactive compound in there. I don't know. I did not see, because things like uranium and cesium, to be clear, are toxic heavy metals as well.
Right.
I don't know if they were able to create a bacterium that could actually gather those up and help clean those up, or if it's more like you're cleaning up other heavy metals in the presence of radiation from those.
Okay.
So that is a good question,
Cool.
and I don't have a full answer for you.
All right, cool.
Now, switching to another field, though, in the medical field, researchers are studying how the bacteria is able to resist radiation so they can better understand both cancer and aging. Because both cancer and aging, basically, in the most basic sense, involve the breakdown of DNA. And this bacterium seems amazing at resisting that breakdown and the corruption of its DNA. And so understanding how it does that, people are hoping that could lead to some medical breakthroughs in the future. We don't really have any right now because it's still sort of in the research phase on that.
Right.
And then kind of finally, those who are keenly interested in life on other planets are also very interested in studying this mega extremophile, as it's called, because it may hold clues as to what life may look like on other planets where conditions, including radiation, are far more harsh than here on Earth. We have an amazing magnetosphere that actually protects us from most of the radiation in space.
Right.
Space is a crazy radioactive place. And if you don't have that on another planet, say, Mars, for example, you're going to have much higher levels of radiation, but potentially you go, something like this could actually survive on a planet like Mars. Pretty interesting. So,
Wild.
Conan the Bacterium is a really cool example of science coming from an unexpected place. In this case, a bulging can that shouldn't be bulging. And luckily, people investigated it and were like, whoa, that's interesting.
That's new.
What's going on there? And so we learned all about this.
That's so fun.
That's what I have this week. I actually mentioned a lot of my sources directly in the episode, but I will mention that I got some of the facts and numbers and stuff I needed from good old Wikipedia. So a shout out to them.
Woo.
That's what I got. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back with Rachel.
All right. Welcome back to the show, everyone. All right. So I know last week I went a little hard and really excited about dandelions, and I'm not going to lie.
You did.
I did.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to lie. I actually missed a lot of the actually strange parts because of timing, and I got too excited about dandelions. So
You went hard on dandelions.
Are we in
You
for
were like-
dandelions round 2?
We're in for dandelions round 2. I'm so sorry, but I'm also
my
so
gosh.
excited.
Gosh.
Okay.
Okay.
It was really just the tip of the iceberg. So I promise that it's absolutely fascinating. You'll understand why I did 2 parts. So I touched on this. I promise. So I touched on this last week, but we really don't admire the sheer fact and absurdity about where dandelions are able to grow. The fact that they are able to survive in the spaces that they are able to is truly amazing. Very few plants are able to grow or even sprout where dandelions do, partially due to high foot traffic, but also due to pollution and other like easily available nutrients, as well as the heat island effect that happens. That's pretty hard to work with.
You mean like in a sidewalk or middle of a road or something?
Yeah,
like
in
that,
the middle
right?
of a road or a sidewalk. In addition to that, they actually are able to withstand freeze and freeze events as well as frost for longer periods of time over several days, so they won't die completely. And they actually don't need a ton of space. They just need enough space for their taproot. And they are able to survive even like I said, the heat island effect or like really high temperatures, as well as not enough moisture. It actually just causes their leaves to become more bitter, which is wild.
Yeah, I've experienced that. Yeah, I mean, because the leaves are edible, and sometimes, often they'll say like, you want to eat the youngest ones possible. So it's probably
for sure.
they're getting more bitter just because of the harsh conditions, or maybe from drought. You're saying?
Yeah,
Or not
some
having
of
enough
it.
water.
Some of it is drought. Some of it is like hot temperature, and that will cause the leaves to become a little more bitter, which is wild.
Interesting.
So part of this, and I talked about this last week, was through their long and hardy taproot, which can grow down to 15 feet, which...
Yeah, that blew my mind. My mind.
That was...
My friends have had me like doing some gardening work on a very random tangent, and like they're more traditionalists, so they want to get rid of like the dandelions and things like that. And after researching dandelions and learning this about the taproot, like I have no like will to go for dandelions and try to remove them. So I'm like, you do what you want to do. Yeah. So generally speaking, 15 feet, it can happen. It would happen over a number of
rare,
years.
yeah.
For the most part, they go like 3 to 12 feet. So or like
that's still
3 feet is
outrageous.
like pretty high, and then like 12 feet is pretty big. Most dandelions that we see are 6 to 12 inches. So it can happen.
That sounds better.
Yeah. There are also a lot of different species of dandelions and many micro species, what they call. So they have a genus, in their genus, there's
she's
like
got to say it again. Here it comes.
Gosh.
What's it called? You said it last week so well. Let's hear it, Rachel. You're not going to get off the hook.
Oh, I was hoping. Taraxacum. There we go. We're gonna go with it. There are like 2,500 species in that particular genus, but dandelions, there are about 250 documented species and several thousand micro species of dandelions, which are incredibly hard to identify. You have to be a botanist and studying them like very closely under microscope. But for the most part, they are there are about 250 described species of dandelion. I mentioned this last week. Even if a part of that taproot breaks off or is left behind, it will resprout into a new dandelion. And again, I covered that last week, so I'm not going to talk about it. But let's talk about reproduction, right? You'd think that it's mostly the seeds, right? And the pollination that happens with the dandelions. But each dandelion plant, the flower head that we think of, and from budding to seed, dandelions are able to go from a little flower bud to a seed in about 5 days.
It's pretty quick.
So they can go really fast. But each dandelion can produce up to 20,000 seeds in their life.
In their life. Okay,
Yeah.
I thought you meant at once, and I'm like, what?
Well,
doesn't seem that high.
The common dandelion, which is one of the more hilarious common ones, produces each flower head is able to produce anywhere from 50 to 170 seeds per flower. But they reflower several times. So in a year, they can produce up to 5,000 seeds.
So many.
And those seeds don't technically need to be pollinated, but they can just be produced asexually by the dandelions. And those seeds can then, if they are under a couple millimeters of soil, they can hang out right there until conditions are right for 9 years.
Whoa, 9?
Which is a long time.
There's got to be some diminishing returns on that, though.
It doesn't happen very much, but it doesn't happen for every seed, obviously, but
sure.
They are, for up to 9 years, they are able to do that.
I mean, we've talked on the show about people, growing seeds that were thousands of years old.
Exactly.
So
We have, yes.
Yeah. And most of those seeds, when they are carried by the wind, they have this little parachute. We all know what that looks like.
Love them. Yep.
Though most dandelion seeds land within 30 feet of their parent, but it has been documented that a dandelion seed, if the conditions are right, can travel up to 500 miles.
Wow.
Oh,
which
wow.
is
a long way.
Way
Super far.
far. Obviously, that is a very rare occurrence. It doesn't happen very often. Most of the time, like 99% of them will land within 30 feet. But if conditions are just right, and that's like a calm, not like high winds, a calm kind of drift with lots of upwinds, they can travel up to 500 miles, which is insane. Did not love finding that out. But even before that, the flower head itself, the yellow flower that we think of, is actually more than one flower. So they can be really helpful. They're not necessarily the best nutrition, but for like native bees and honeybees and such. But because they're such early bloomers, it actually does help provide some source of food for insects when they are like first coming through. But they're not pollinating or eating just one flower. Each of the flower heads there is actually more than one. And the individual petals that you see on a dandelion are actually the individual flowers on that flower head. They're called florets.
Right.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
So it's actually over 100 individual flowers that are just packed together very, very closely. So
that is very cool.
Which isn't super unusual, but it is unusual because we don't think of dandelions as being more than one flower, and it actually is over 100 flowers all really close together.
Sure.
So when someone says, "Oh, I've got 1 million dandelions in my flowers in my yard," they might be right.
They might be right.
They're probably correct, actually. Yeah. So that's really what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to give them a little bit of their time in the sun. I know I talked about it last week, but I missed all of these things because I was so excited about dandelions. So I wanted to make sure that they really get their due. So my sources this week, Wikipedia as always, but the Wisconsin Horticulture, the Smithsonian Gardens, and the University of Minnesota Extension Service also had great bits about dandelions, which is great.
You were going to say U of M, weren't you going to?
I was going to say U of M, and then I realized that there are more universities with M's and states that start with M than just Minnesota. So University of Minnesota.
That's local lingo.
If I'm the only person, I'm sure, with all our listeners too, who now has the Proclaimers song in my head after you said 500
miles. Oh, what a great song, though. Oh, so fun.
Oh, it's definitely in my head I'm going to be laying in bed.
So Kirk and I work together now, so I'm just going to walk in and I'm going to play it into your office.
Amazing. Amazing. I appreciate that.
Anytime. All right. Well, I was the last one to go. So
yes, you were.
Yes.
Unless anybody has anything else to share, I think that is all we've got for this week's episode. So thanks for listening.
We'll be back, next week with more stories about dandelions.
No.
Just going to become the Dandelion podcast.
Okay. That was it. No more dandelions for now.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone, for listening to today's show. Be sure to subscribe. New episodes drop every Wednesday, and we love sharing this strange world with all our listeners. If you would be so kind as to leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever you get your podcasts, that would be great. It lets other lovers of the strange discover the show. You can reach us by searching for Strange by Nature Podcast on Instagram, Facebook, and Blue Sky. You can send us an email as well. Our address is contact@strangebynaturepodcast.com. If you want more information about the show, you can check out our website, strangebynaturepodcast.com, and you can support the show and get ad-free episodes at patreon.com/strangebynature. Until next week, get outside, stay curious, and embrace the strange.